Oh, God, no, you're just yourself, yeah. I want to hear me talk.
All right, good afternoon. I am Tamara Rash. Lauren had reached out to ask me to come join you guys today and talk to you about bloodborne pathogens. So a little bit about me and why I give this lecture. I spent about 10 years working bedside in hospitals before I got my occupational health and safety degree. So I am an occupational health and safety professional, which requires me to maintain compliance with all the OSHA requirements. One of them being bloodborne pathogens, which is why I join organizations in giving this lecture. I know it's not a fun topic, but it's something that you all are potentially exposed to every day on your job. So that's why we're going to cover this topic. So jumping into it, a little bit of what we're going to talk about is what a bloodborne pathogen is. You probably already know this, so it's probably going to be a review and just redundant for you. We'll talk about who is at risk for an exposure, different types or different ways of controlling exposures for you all, and then what you need to do if you are exposed.
Oh, here we go. Let's not touch things.
All right. So what are bloodborne pathogens? Basically, it's microorganisms present in blood or bodily fluids that can lead to serious illness for you if you are exposed. So think of hepatitis B, hepatitis C, HIV. Those are some of the more commonly known bloodborne pathogens. Again, you become exposed to it when your blood comes in contact with other people's blood that had this infected with it. Hepatitis B is probably one of the more common. Over 12 million Americans are infected with hepatitis B. That's 1 in 20. It is a silent infection. You can see the symptoms up there: jaundice, fatigue, abdominal pain, loss of appetite. Those are a lot of symptoms consistent with other things. Initially, you may not realize that it is hepatitis B. The one thing about hepatitis B that I find very eye-opening is it can survive in dry blood for at least 1 week.
Think about how nasty your cuts are.
Disgusting, right?
Yeah, that's why I don't like it.
I mean, think about how many times you pick up a backboard with dried blood on it with no gloves, and you're at risk of potentially exposing yourself there. That's why PPE becomes so important. Making sure that you're cleaning things very thoroughly becomes so important because it can survive for at least 1 week in dry blood. And then that last statistic at the bottom, up to 40,000 people in the US become infected, newly infected each year. It's a lot of people. Hepatitis C, this is probably the most common bloodborne infection in the US. Again, the symptoms very similar to hepatitis B, but this one can lead to chronic liver disease and death. So when we talk about exposures and reporting exposures, again, reporting is going to be very important for you if you do have an exposure, so that you can start those post-exposure labs and monitoring as soon as possible. And then HIV, this is probably one of the most scary that we hear about. It is obviously the virus that leads to AIDS. It affects your immune system, the body's immune system. The one thing about it, though, is it does not survive well outside of the body. There are an estimated 1.1 million people living with HIV today. But once you are infected, you're infected. It remains in your system for life. So there's not any sort of medication you can take or anything that you can do once you are infected with HIV to remove that from your system. Some other bloodborne pathogens that we may not hear about more as frequently is Zika virus and Ebola. They are caused by viruses or bacteria. They do circulate in the blood at some phase, which makes them capable of being transmitted. Most of these are rare in the US, although how many years ago was it we had the Ebola scare? And UC Health was what, the Ebola location for the region, right? So that made us in this area and the things that you do more susceptible to being exposed. So here's a list of some others up here. I won't read through all of these, but just know it's not just, bloodborne pathogens are not just those Hep C, Hep B, HIV. There are other things out there, which means even if you do not suspect that your patient, the person that you are transporting, dealing with, has any of those more common bloodborne pathogens, it doesn't mean that it doesn't put you at risk. And the one thing about a bloodborne pathogen is once you are exposed, you are exposed. So when we talk about splashes to the eyes, that happens very frequently in the hospital, but an eye wash station is not going to reduce your risk of exposure there. It's not going to dilute that out. It's not going to take it away. Once that bloodborne pathogen enters your eyes, it's there. You're not going to rinse it out. The one thing I will call out for you is if you are on the truck and you have a splash to the eye, the easiest thing for you to do is pop a bag of saline to rinse your eyes out. Doesn't mean that you haven't been exposed. You still need to do that post-exposure stuff, but that's the easiest way to reduce that risk of infection for you. And it's something that you have easily available.
And just keep in mind, guys, when you do your exposure and you do come to Westchester, which you usually do, we will probably put you in the decon room under that eye wash station forever. So if you feel like you didn't get a good enough washout via saline in the back of the rig, we'll put you in the decon room, make you get that really good washout with the eye wash.
So some contamination sources, obviously blood. We talked about Hep B surviving in dried blood. So any of your materials that have come in contact with that blood, bodily fluids. Anybody who has blood in their urine can transmit bloodborne pathogens to you if you come in contact with their urine. Sputum. They've got bloody mouth and they spit on you. I know you probably deal with that frequently as well. Unfixed tissue, cultures, basically anything where blood can be present or could have been present, you can become exposed. It usually occurs through direct contact, but it can occur through indirect contact as well. Again, PPE, very, very important for you. Make sure that you're wearing gloves. I know with what you do, it's very fast paced. Sometimes you're rolling up on the scene very quickly, right? But protect yourself. You can't do what you do every day if you do not protect yourself and take care of yourself. Wear your PPE. I don't know how easily it is for you guys to wear eye protection when you're out in the field. Do you have the mask available with the face shield?
Yeah, we do. We got safety glasses and then we have masks as well with some shields.
Yeah, highly encourage you just get in the habit of grabbing that when possible to protect yourself as much as you can. Needle sticks is probably one of the most common ways that we see exposures happen. The smallest prick to your finger is an exposure. The main thing that I do ask of you is if you have that exposure, let us know when you come in. We will help you with those post-exposure labs and follow-up. We actually will get the order for the patient that you transported in, get their labs so that they're not following you as an unknown. Because if you're followed as an unknown exposure, they're likely gonna recommend PEP. And I don't know if you've ever heard of PEP or been put on PEP, but it's that post-exposure prophylaxis medication. It's not fun to take. It's actually it's got some gnarly side effects. So, highly recommend you let us know as soon as possible. We can follow that person that you were exposed to so that you're not being followed as an unknown.
One thing to keep in mind with that, guys, is if you do get an exposure from a patient, make sure that you are checking into the same facility you took your patient to. I know you guys mostly just transport to Westchester Hospital, but for some odd reason you take somebody to Atrium and then you come back and you're like, oh man, I should probably really get checked in for some type of exposure. You really should go back to Atrium because it's just a lot easier to follow the patient. Or if you know of the exposure, just bring them to Westchester, you know our process. Our process is really streamlined. I think we do a really good job. You guys check in as a patient, we give you the red packet, you guys fill out all that paperwork. That red packet, part of it gets faxed to our infection prevention nurse, the other half goes to me. I always see it in my mailbox the next day and make sure she or I are following up with you. So if you have an exposure, come on by.
What we're there for. You're bringing them to us, let us help you. Also, think about all the glass that you come in contact with on scene, it's a car accident, things like that. You are at risk of exposure when dealing with those types of things as well. So it's not just needle sticks, obviously. Cuts from other objects in the field can occur as well. So when we think about bloodborne pathogen exposures, obviously healthcare professionals and first responders are probably the highest risk groups. We deal with it a lot. Housekeeping personnel in those industries are at higher risk as well. The CDC does estimate 5.6 million workers in healthcare and related occupations are at risk. A lot of people. So we talked about this already, but an exposure is that eye, mouth, or other mucous membrane, non-intact skin contact with blood or other potentially infectious materials. So some things that you can do, obviously PPE, that's first and foremost. You want to treat all blood and bodily fluids as if they are contaminated. So again, even if you think that person doesn't have anything, or maybe it's somebody that you know in the community outside of here, and you think that they're fine, you don't know what that person has. So assume everybody is infected with something and take all precautions you can. You want to follow proper cleanup and decontamination procedures. So when you're cleaning your trucks after you've transported somebody, make sure that you're allowing proper dwell time on your disinfecting agents that you're cleaning with. So we're not just wiping with a bleach wipe and then immediately wiping off. We're allowing that dwell time to kill those sources of bacteria, viruses, all of that. And again, PPE, I cannot reiterate that enough. That is the main way that you can protect yourself. Some other things, do you have sharps containers available? Make sure that they're not overly filled. That's something that we do see a lot where people will try to dispose of a needle in the sharps container and it's full and we try to stuff it down in there and now we're getting stuck by maybe a needle that we weren't even trying to dispose of and we have to be followed as an unknown. Make sure that you're keeping an eye on that you have that available. Wash your hands after you've provided treatment to anybody in the field. Make sure that you're practicing those good personal hygiene practices. Some PPE that you may have, obviously gloves, masks, gowns, face shields. There's CPR pocket mask on here. But make sure you know what PPE is available to you and that you utilize it. If you need a better fitting glove and you don't have it available, let somebody know so that can be ordered. And again, just use it appropriately. I don't know if you all do you have to get fitted for N95 masks?
No, last time we dealt with it, it was just a universal So we still do have them available, but we didn't all get fitted for them, no.
One thing to call out on that, if you're not actually being fitted for them, know that they may not be providing that good seal, that proper protection with respiratory conditions. That's why we have to go through the fit testing in the hospital, to make sure that we're wearing one appropriate to each of us. But a PAPR, yeah, if you have PAPRs, those are probably my go-to. So your responsibilities as the employee, what do you need to know? Make sure you wear your PPE, make sure you do this training every year. With your PPE, make sure you are caring for it, cleaning and maintaining it appropriately. Is it stored where in the temperature setting it needs to be stored in? Are you cleaning it for the manufacturer's use? All of those things. If you notice that something is damaged and you need it repaired or you need it replaced, make sure that you're notifying the appropriate people to get that taken care of and you're not using broken equipment. When you are cleaning up, make sure you're wearing gloves when you clean up and that you're using the appropriate product. An example of that is our glucometers in the hospital. We can only use bleach wipes on that. And there's a specific way that you have to use the bleach wipes. You can't just wipe it. You have to use it in a very specific way.
It's ridiculous, but it makes sense.
But just be mindful of that. You know, what are the cleaning agents that you should be using? What is the dwell time for that cleaning agent? Is it going to disinfect in 3 minutes? How long do you need to let it sit? And then if you do have any blood on you, make sure that you're washing those areas of your body. If it's on your arm, look for any cuts, any open areas on your skin. Because even though you may not think that you have an abrasion there, you might have just the smallest little prick on your arm that could lead to an exposure there. So make sure you're paying attention to that after the fact. And then any contaminated PPE, towels, anything that you use, make sure that you are disposing of those properly. That is considered regulated waste. I know at the hospital we have bins for you all to throw your dirty stuff in, but make sure that you do that as well.
If you guys do get soaked in blood or have some blood droplets come on your uniform, you're more than welcome to come to the hospital. We can give you some scrubs until you guys get your stuff washed. But I know you carry like 50,000 uniforms. But if you are at the hospital and you just want to get that stuff off, we can offer you to send you back to the station in those.
Now, I know downtown, in our decon room, they will often clean their backboards off in there. Do they do the same thing
Same.
in Westchester?
Same, yeah. So if you guys bring something in and it's completely contaminated, our staff is instructed that if it is contaminated, they need to take it to the decon room and then I'll clean it when I see them in there. You guys are more than welcome to clean them yourself if you want to just take it quickly back with you. But if you ever do see something outside that has blood on it, please let me know because we've had some instances where people just drag them outside and it drives me absolutely. So that should not happen.
But know that we do have that capability there. Items contaminated with blood or other potentially infectious materials, again, that's considered regulated waste, meaning it has to go into it has to be disposed of in a specific way. Whether it be a red bio bag, we have the bio bins, the sharps containers, things like that. That is heavily regulated by the health department. And something that you need to make sure you're complying with because you do not want them knocking on your door to check things like that. It's never a fun experience. Another thing that you can do as employees is get that hepatitis B vaccination. That is offered to anyone who has a potential for exposure. If you choose not to get it, there is a declination form that you have to complete for your employer to keep on file. But it is offered to anyone with exposure risk. It's usually provided at no cost and within 10 days to anyone who has potential exposure. So if you do have an exposure and there's a risk of Hep B, they will ask you if you want the vaccine. washed any exposed areas with soap and water if you have an exposure. We talked about flushing the eyes, with saline. You can also, you just use water. If you have a splash to the eyes, nose, mouth. But saline is something that's easily accessible. Usually you just pop a bag and squirt it in your eyes pretty easily. Report. This is gonna be my biggest thing on exposures. If you have an exposure, let somebody know. Don't think it's not a big deal and just walk out the door. These can be life-changing conditions that you could become infected with. Let us know, let us get you started on that post-exposure follow-up. Look at your labs, look at the person you were exposed to labs. Let's know for sure if you've been exposed to anything so that we can then take appropriate steps moving forward. They will talk about PEP. If it is somebody that comes back with a viral load that's detected for HIV or any of the others, they will offer you PEP. So you'll get that full rundown on what PEP consists of, the potential side effects, and you will be offered to go on that. But reporting it is the main thing. We can't do any of those other things until you report. When you report it, they're gonna ask if you know the person you were exposed to. They're gonna ask how you were exposed. Were you stuck by a needle? Were you spit on? Did you have something splash in your eyes? You know, what happened? And then you're gonna go through that lab follow-up. And it's not just gonna be a one-time lab draw. They're gonna draw your labs initially. If anything is potentially detected on that source patient, you will have follow-ups at 3 months, 6 months. So there is a timeline, and employee health or infection control will provide that guidance. They will also offer counseling if you have been exposed to something pretty significant. That will be offered. Any questions? Stuff you already know? Just a little bit,
Your yearly blessing of
Real nice.
make it as painless as possible.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good, safe rest of your shift.